My wife invited a stranger into our guest room, a veteran she claimed needed our help. She didn't even ask me first. I should have seen the signs earlier, but I was too caught up in my own world to notice what was happening right under my nose. It wasn't until I heard them talking late at night, their whispered conversations stopping abruptly whenever I entered the room, that I realized something was terribly wrong. The veteran with the haunted eyes and the charming smile had a history with my wife that she'd never bothered to mention. That's when I moved myself into my lawyer's office and discovered the truth that would change everything. I had met Melissa during my second tour in Afghanistan. She was a bright-eyed journalist, embedded with our unit to document the humanitarian efforts in the region. Her determination to find beauty amidst chaos was what drew me to her. She didn't shy away from the harsh realities of war, but she also didn't let them define her worldview. "There's always a story worth telling," she'd say, camera in hand, dust covering her face, especially the ones people don't want to hear. We married 6 months after I returned stateside, both of us eager to start the peaceful life we'd talked about during those long nights under the Afghan stars. I took a corporate security job while Melissa continued her journalism career, focusing on domestic stories. We bought a small house in the suburbs with a garden Melissa lovingly tended and a spare bedroom we hoped would someday belong to a child. For 5 years, everything seemed perfect, till it alls. The problems started subtly. Melissa became distant, often staying late at the office or leaving early for research. When she was home, she was constantly on her phone, smiling at text, messages that apparently weren't important enough to share with me. I tried to ignore the changes, telling myself it was just work stress, or that we were going through a natural phase in our marriage. I'd been through worse in combat, I reasoned. We could weather this storm too. Then came the morning when everything shifted. Melissa was making coffee, her back to me, when she said, "James, I need to talk to you about something." The serious tone made me look up from my newspaper. "What's wrong?" She turned around, coffee forgotten. "Do you remember my story about homeless veterans last year?" And I nodded. It had been a powerful piece that had earned her recognition and awards. She'd spent months interviewing veterans who had fallen through the cracks of the system, sharing their stories with a compassion that had moved even the most hardened readers. "Well," she continued, "one of them reached out to me yesterday, Michael Turner. He's having a rough time, lost his housing situation, and needs a temporary place to stay." I waited for her to continue, to explain why she was telling me this. When she didn't, I raised an eyebrow, and I told him he could stay in our guest room, just for a few weeks until he finds something more permanent. The coffee mug in my hand froze halfway to my lips. "You what?" "It's only temporary," she said quickly. "He served 3 tours in Iraq. Purple Heart recipient. He's been having a hard time adjusting to civilian life. So you invited a stranger to live with us without discussing it with me first?" I set my mug down harder than intended, coffee sloshing. Over the rim, Melissa's eyes flashed with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "He's not a stranger, James. I spent weeks interviewing him for my story. He's a good person who's been dealt a bad hand." "That doesn't give you the right to make this kind of decision unilaterally," I argued. "This is our home. We make decisions. Like this together? Would you have said yes if I'd asked?" she challenged. The question caught me off guard. Would I have? I like to think of myself as compassionate, especially toward fellow veterans, but inviting someone to live with us was a major step. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I deserve the chance to be part of the decision." Melissa's shoulders slumped slightly. "You're right. I should have talked to you first. I'm sorry." She reached across the table and took my hand. "But James, he really needs our help. Just for a little while, please." Her eyes were pleading, and despite my anger, I found myself nodding. "Fine. But a few weeks maximum, and we need to set some ground rules." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. I'll be here this afternoon." I spent the rest of the morning in a sour mood, cleaning the guest room and rearranging things to make space for our unexpected visitor. It wasn't just that Melissa had made this decision without me. It was the way she'd done it, presenting it as a fait accompli rather than a discussion. It made me wonder what other decisions she was making without my input. Michael Turner arrived. At exactly 3 p.m., carrying a weathered duffel bag that had seen better days. He was tall and lean, with the kind of muscle definition that comes from practical use rather than a gym membership. His dark hair was cut short, military style. A scar ran along his left jawline, a reminder of the battles he'd fought. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, green and penetrating. They seemed to take in everything at once, assessing and cataloging in the way only someone who has lived through combat can do. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, but not aggressive. "Thank you for opening your home to me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it." His courtesy disarmed me slightly. "James is fine," I replied. "You're welcome." Though it seems my wife made the arrangements without much input from me, a flicker of something concern, embarrassment, crossed his face. "If this is a problem, I can find somewhere else." "No," Melissa interrupted, shooting me a warning look. "It's not a problem at all. James is just joking. Right, James?" I forced a smile. "All right, just a joke. Please, come in. Let me show you to your room." As I led him through our home, I couldn't help but notice how carefully he moved. Each step deliberate, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. It was a habit I recognized from my own post-deployment days, the hypervigilance that never quite leaves you even when the war is far behind. "You serve?" he asked as we reached the guest room. "Afghanistan? To tours with the 10th Mountain Division." He nodded, a flash of recognition in his eyes. "Iraq. 3 tours with the 1st Infantry. Got my ticket home after an IED, took out our Humvee." He gestured vaguely to his leg, and I noticed for the first time the slight stiffness in his gait. "Rough," I said, a world of understanding packed into that single word. "Could have been worse." 3 others in my vehicle weren't as lucky. The survivor's guilt in his voice was all too familiar. I'd lost friends too, had asked myself the same questions. He undoubtedly asked himself, why them and not me? What could I have done differently? "Bathrooms across the hall," I said, changing the subject. "Kitchen's open if you need anything. We usually eat dinner around 7. Thank you. But please don't go to any trouble on my account." "To disrupt your routines?" "It's no trouble," I assured him, though part of me still resented the disruption. "Melissa would probably have my head if I didn't at least offer you dinner." A smile ghosted across his face. "She's quite something, your wife." "Yes," I agreed, unsure why his comment made me uneasy. "She is." The first few days with Michael in our house were awkward but manageable. He kept to himself mostly, spending hours on his laptop in the guest room or taking long walks around the neighborhood. When we did interact, he was unfailingly polite, always offering to help with chores or errands. It was hard to maintain my initial resentment in the face of his evident gratitude and respect. What I couldn't ignore, however, was the change in Melissa. She seemed more animated, more present than she had been in months. She came home from work earlier, cooked elaborate meals, and engaged Michael in long conversations about everything from politics to philosophy. It was as if his presence had awakened something in her that had been dormant or that she had been keeping hidden from me. I told myself I was being paranoid. Melissa was a journalist. She was naturally curious about people and their stories. Michael, with his combat experience and subsequent struggles, was exactly the kind of person who would capture her interest. There was nothing more to it than that. Then came the night that shook my certainty. I woke around 2 a.m., reaching for Melissa, only to find her side of the bed empty and cold. Groggily, I got up to check if she was working late in her home office, as she sometimes did when insomnia struck. The office was dark and empty. Making my way downstairs, I heard hushed voices coming from the kitchen. I approached quietly, not deliberately trying to eavesdrop, but not announcing my presence either. Through the cracked door, I could see Melissa and Michael sitting at the kitchen table, 2 steaming mugs between them. Their heads bent close together in intimate conversation. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," Melissa was saying, her voice low and urgent. "And you can't keep hiding it from him forever." "What good would it do to tell him now?" Michael replied. "It would only make things worse. He deserves to." "Know the truth," Melissa insisted. "We both do." Michael reached across the table and took her hand. "Some truths are better left buried, Mel. You know that as well as I do." The familiar nickname hit me like a physical blow. Mel, not Melissa. Mel. It spoke of an intimacy, a history that went beyond the professional relationship they'd claimed. I must have made a noise because they both looked up suddenly, their hands jerking apart. Melissa's face paled when she saw me standing in the doorway. "James," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "What are you doing up?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied coldly. "What's going on here?" "We were just talking," Michael said, rising from his chair. "I have trouble sleeping sometimes. PTSD. Melissa heard me moving around and came down to check on me." It was a plausible explanation. Many veterans struggled with sleep disturbances. But it didn't explain the hand-holding, the hushed conversation, or the secrets they were apparently keeping from me. "At 2 in the morning?" I challenged. "And what? Truth does who deserve to know?" Melissa and Michael exchanged a look that only heightened my suspicion. "It's not what you think, James," Melissa began. "And what exactly do I think?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my effort to control it. "James, please," Melissa pleaded. "You'll wake the neighbors." "I don't care about the neighbors," I shouted. "I care about what's going on in my own house. Between my wife and a man she invited to stay with us, without even consulting me first." Michael stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Look, man, I think I should go. This was a mistake." "No," I said firmly. "You're not going anywhere until someone tells me what the hell is going on here." The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa looked at Michael, a question in her eyes. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. "James," Melissa finally said, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "There's something we need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." I braced myself, certain she was about to confess to an affair. But what she said next was so unexpected, so far from what I had imagined, that for a moment, I was sure I had misheard her. "Michael isn't just someone I interviewed for my story," she said. "He's my brother." Stared at her, uncomprehending. "Your brother, but your brother died. He told me he died in a car accident before we met." Melissa nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "That's what I thought. That's what my parents told me after he enlisted against their wishes. They said he died in a car crash, showed me falsified documents, even held a funeral. Found out years later they'd done it to spare me the worry of having a brother in a war zone." Her voice cracked with bitterness. "They never told me the truth, even after he was reported missing in action and presumed dead." I looked at Michael, really looked at him for the first time. There was something familiar in the shape of his eyes. The curve of his jaw features I'd seen before in old photographs of Melissa's family. But how? ... I began struggling to process this revelation. "I recognized her byline," Michael explained. "After I got out of the hospital, after I'd been through rehab and was trying to piece my life back together, I saw her name on an article. It couldn't be a coincidence, I thought. How many Melissa Carltons could there be in journalism? So I tracked her down, came to one of her public speaking events." He smiled faintly at the memory. "She fainted when she saw me. I thought I was seeing a ghost," Melissa admitted. "It took hours for him to convince me he was real, to explain what had happened." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the hurt of her deception overshadowing my relief that this wasn't an affair after all. "We've been married for 5 years, Melissa. 5 years of you letting me believe your brother was dead when he was very much alive." Melissa flinched at the accusation in my tone. "I wanted to tell you, James, so many times. But Michael asked me not to. He wasn't ready to be found. Not officially. The things he'd seen, the things he'd done during the war. ... He needed time to heal before facing the world again." "So you've been what, secretly meeting with him for years? Helping him financially?" The pieces were starting to fall into place, the unexplained absences, the secretive phone calls, the mysterious withdrawals from our joint account that she'd attributed to various expenses. "Yes," she admitted. "I've been helping him where I could, when I could. I'm sorry for the deception, James. I truly am. But he's my brother, my only family left. I couldn't abandon him." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of everything. "And now? Why bring him here now, after all this time? Why not just tell me the truth from the beginning?" Michael and Melissa exchanged another look. And I knew there was more to the story, something they still weren't telling me. "James," Michael said slowly, "I'm sick. Cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months left. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I looked at Melissa, saw the grief etched into every line of her face, and understood suddenly why she had been so distant, so preoccupied these past months. She wasn't pulling away from me. She was drowning in a sorrow she felt she couldn't share. I needed to spend time with him, Melissa explained, her voice barely above a whisper. To make up for all the years we lost, I was going to tell you everything, I swear. I just ... I couldn't find the words. The kitchen. The revelation about Michael's condition washing over me in waves. Cancer? Stage 4. 6 months. The words echoed in my mind, harsh and unforgiving. My anger dissipated, replaced by a hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. No wonder Melissa had been acting differently. She wasn't just dealing with the shock of reuniting with her long-lost brother. She was also preparing to lose him all over again. "I'm sorry," I said finally, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "About the cancer and about ... everything." Michael nodded, his expression solemn. "Thanks. I've made my peace with it, well, as much as anyone can." An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. The digital clock on the microwave blinked to 37. A reminder of how surreal this middle-of-the-night confession felt. "We should all get some sleep," Melissa suggested, her voice strained. "We can talk more tomorrow." "Right," I agreed, though I doubted any of us would find sleep easily after this conversation. As we headed back upstairs, Melissa reached for my hand. I let her take it, but there was a new distance between us, one that couldn't be bridged by physical touch alone. She had kept such a significant secret from me for our entire relationship. A brother or not, that breach of trust wasn't something I could simply overlook. The next morning, I called in sick to work. There was no way I could focus on corporate security protocols when my personal life had just been turned upside down. Melissa had already left for the office, escaping the tension, I suspected, but Michael was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, methodically slicing fruit for what appeared to be a substantial breakfast. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the spread. "Cooking helps me think. I figured we could all use a decent meal after last night." "Not at all," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee, though I'm not sure I have much of an appetite. Continued slicing, his movements precise and controlled. "Listen, James, I want you to know that I never intended to come between you and Melissa. When I found her again, I made her promise not to tell anyone about me, not even you. That was my call, not hers." I took a long sip of my coffee, considering his words. Why? Why all the secrecy? He set down the knife and turned to face me fully. When I came back from Iraq, I was right. The things I'd seen, the things I'd done, they changed me. I couldn't readjust to civilian life. Couldn't hold down a job. Started drinking. Got into fights. Ended up homeless for a while. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, fingers tracing the scar there. I didn't want Melissa to see me like that. And I definitely didn't want her new husband to know she had a screwed-up vet for a brother. "So instead you let her carry that burden alone," I observed, not unkindly. "Let her lie to her husband for years." "Yeah," he acknowledged with a grimace. "Not my finest decision. But by the time I realized what a strain it was putting on her, on your marriage, it seemed too late to come clean. And then I got the diagnosis." ... double quotes, he trailed off, eyes distant. Suddenly time became very precious. I didn't want to waste what little I had left on explanations and apologies. I could understand that at least. In the face of death, many of the things we think matter, propriety, social norms, even honesty, sometimes fade into insignificance. What remains is the primal desire for connection, for reconciliation, for making amends before it's too late. "So what happens now?" I asked. Michael shrugged. "That's up to you and Melissa. I can leave today if that would make things easier," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "No, you should stay. Melissa needs this time." "With you, and honestly, so do I?" He raised an eyebrow. "You do? You're her brother. It makes you family. And I want to know my family, even if we only have 6 months to do it." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you, James. I mean it." We ate breakfast in a companionable silence after that, the initial tension between us easing somewhat. Now there were still unresolved issues, still conversations that needed to happen, particularly with Melissa. But for now, this truce was enough. When Melissa returned from work that evening, she was clearly braced for conflict. She entered the house cautiously, her eyes darting between Michael and me as we sat in the living room watching a baseball game. "You're both ... here," she observed, setting down her bag. "And the house is still standing." "We came to an understanding," I told her. "Michael's staying as long as he needs to." Tears welled in her eyes. "James, we still need to talk." I cut her off gently. "There's a lot we need to work through, but not tonight. Tonight, let's just have dinner as a family." The relief on her face was palpable. "Okay, yes, dinner sounds perfect." Over the next few weeks, a new routine established itself in our household. Michael, despite his illness, insisted on contributing. He took over most of the cooking, revealing a talent in the kitchen none of us had expected. He fixed things around: the house a leaky faucet, a squeaky door hinge, a temperamental garage door opener that had been on my to-do list for months. He became a presence in our home, filling spaces I hadn't even realized were empty. Melissa seemed happier than I'd seen her in years. She took time off work to spend with Michael, something she'd rarely done, even for vacations with me. They would sit for hours, making up for lost time, sharing stories of their separate lives. Sometimes I would join them, learning about my wife's childhood through her brother's eyes. Other times, I gave them privacy, understanding that some conversations weren't meant to include me. But as Michael became more integrated into our lives, as Melissa's attention became increasingly focused on him, I found myself feeling like an outsider in my own home. The intimacy I had once shared with my wife was fading, replaced by a polite consideration that felt more like friendship than marriage. We hadn't had a real conversation about her deception, about what it meant for our relationship. We were both so focused on making Michael's remaining time meaningful that we were neglecting the damage that had been done to our marriage. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday, about a month after Michael's arrival. I came home early from work, drenched from the downpour, to find the house unusually quiet. Melissa's car was in the driveway, but there was no sign of her or Michael downstairs. Assuming they might be watching a movie in the den, I headed there first, only to find it empty. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Melissa's voice coming from the guest room, soft and soothing. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, could see Michael lying on the bed, clearly in pain, with Melissa sitting beside him, gently stroking his forehead. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" she was asking. Michael attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Just a bad day. Bet. Meds will kick in soon. Maybe we should call Dr. Reeves, see if he can adjust your dosage." "Mel, we've talked about this. No hospitals, no extreme measures. Just whatever time I have left, spent with you. That's all I want." Melissa's hand trembled slightly. "But if there's a chance there isn't," Michael said firmly. "You know that. We both do." He reached up to cover her hand with his own. "Hey, remember that summer at Lake Champlain? Dad took us fishing and you fell out of the boat?" Melissa gave a watery laugh. "You jumped in after me, even though you couldn't swim. Very well yourself. Mom was so mad she made us both stay in the cabin for the rest of the day. We played Monopoly for hours. You cheated, did not?" I was just strategic. They both laughed, lost in the memory. I stood frozen in the hallway, an intruder on their shared history. These were stories I'd never heard, moments from Melissa's life that she'd never shared with me. It hit me then, with painful clarity, how much of herself she had kept hidden all these years. Not just the existence of her brother, but the entirety of her past. I must have made a sound, because both of them looked up suddenly. Melissa's expression shifted from surprise to concern when she saw my face. "James," she said, rising from the bed, "you're home early." "Meeting got canceled," I replied mechanically. "Is everything okay?" Michael struggled to sit up, just having a rough patch, nothing to worry about. But there was plenty to worry about. The pallor of his skin, the labored way he moved. The prescription bottles lined up on the nightstand, they all told a story of rapid decline. It was getting worse, and faster than any of us had anticipated. "Can I get you anything?" I offered. "Water? Another blanket?" "I'm good, thanks," Michael assured me. "Think I'll try to rest for a bit." Melissa squeezed his hand. "I'll check on you later." In the hallway, she pulled the door mostly closed and turned to me with a sigh. "He's been like this since morning. The pain management isn't working as well as it should. Has he seen a doctor recently?" "He refuses to go back to the hospital. Says there's no point." Her voice broke slightly. "He's so stubborn." "Must run in the family," I said, attempting humor. She didn't smile. "James, I know we need to talk about everything. I just ... with Michael getting worse." "It's fine," I said automatically, though it wasn't. "We have time." But did we? Michael's condition deteriorating. With Melissa becoming more and more focused on caring for him, when would we ever find the space to address the fractures in our own relationship? That night, as we lay in bed not touching, the distance between us felt insurmountable. Melissa was physically present beside me, but mentally, emotionally, she was with her brother, worrying about his pain, his deterioration, the limited time they had left together. "He's not going to make it 6 months, is he?" I asked softly in the darkness. Melissa's breath caught. "The doctor called today. The latest scans. It's spreading faster than they expected. He might have weeks, not months." Her voice was hollow, stripped of emotion, as if saying the words with feeling would make them unbearably real. I reached for her hand across the expanse of sheets. "I'm sorry, Melissa. Truly. I can't lose him again, James. I just found him." The desperation in her voice was heart-wrenching. "I know," I said, because what else could I say? I couldn't promise she wouldn't lose him. I couldn't fix this. All I could do was witness her pain and try to share the burden of it. But as the days passed, it became increasingly clear that Melissa didn't want to share this burden, at least not with me. She closed herself off, spending almost all her time with Michael, coordinating his care, managing his medications, reminiscing about their childhood. When I tried to help, she would politely but firmly decline. "We've got it handled," she would. "Say you focus on work," as if work mattered to me more than supporting my wife through this ordeal. The exclusion hurt, but I tried to understand it. As Melissa and Michael had lost so many years together, it was natural she would want to spend every possible moment with him now. But understanding didn't ease the feeling that I was becoming irrelevant in my own marriage, that the foundation we had built together was crumbling beneath my feet. One evening, about 6 weeks after Michael's arrival, I came home to find Melissa in tears at the kitchen table, a collection of old photographs spread out before her. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately concerned. "Is it Michael?" She shook her head, wiping at her eyes. "No, he's resting. I was just ... remembering." She gestured to the photos. "I found these in a box in the attic. Pictures from when we were kids." I sat down beside her, looking at the images of a younger Melissa with a boy who was unmistakably Michael. Despite the gap of years, they were at a beach, at what appeared to be a birthday party, in front of a Christmas tree. Normal family moments frozen in time. "You two were close," I observed. "He was my best friend," Melissa said softly. "When my parents told me he died, it was like losing a part of myself. I never really got over it. I just ... learned to live with the hole he left behind." I studied her face. This woman I had lived with for 5 years, slept beside, shared dreams and disappointments with. Yet in this moment, looking at her surrounded by fragments of a past she'd never shared with me, she seemed like a stranger. "Did you ever plan to tell me about him?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me for weeks finally escaping. "If he hadn't gotten sick, if he hadn't needed a place to stay, would you have ever told me the truth?" Melissa's silence was answer enough. "See," I said, the hurt settling deep in my chest. "So our entire marriage has been based on a lie." "That's not fair," she protested. "Michael being alive or dead doesn't change who I am, who we are together, doesn't it? You've kept this enormous part of yourself hidden from me. I've been meeting with him secretly for years. You've lied to me consistently, repeatedly, about something fundamental." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now? James, please no, Melissa. This isn't just about Michael. This is about us. It's about the fact that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. About the fact that even now, you're shutting me out. I'm not shutting you out. I'm just trying to spend time with my brother before she couldn't finish the sentence. Before he dies, I completed for her. I understand that. I do. But in focusing so completely on Michael, you're neglecting our marriage. You're neglecting us. Melissa looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed, but suddenly clear. Maybe there is no us anymore, James. Maybe there hasn't been for a long time. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'm saying that maybe this situation with Michael has just brought to the surface problems that were already there. When was the last time we really talked? When was the last time we connected as anything more than roommates sharing a mortgage? She wasn't wrong. Our marriage had been drifting for months, perhaps even years, before Michael's arrival. We'd both been so caught up in our careers in the day-to-day business of living that we'd stopped seeing each other, really seeing each other. So that's it? I asked, a bitter taste in my mouth. You're giving up on us? I didn't say that, Melissa replied, frustration evident in her voice. I'm just saying that we can't pretend everything was perfect before Michael came. Can't blame him for problems that were already there. I'm not blaming Michael, I said, though part of me was. It was easier to direct my anger at this newcomer than to acknowledge the cracks that had been forming in our marriage long before his arrival. I'm just asking for honesty. It's for partnership. For you to let me in instead of pushing me away. Melissa stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to come from her very core. You're right. You deserve honesty. You always have. She gathered the photographs into a neat stack. But right now, I need to check on Michael. His pain medication should have worn off by now. As she stood to leave, I caught her wrist. This conversation isn't over, Melissa. I know, she said softly, but it needs to pause. She gently extracted herself from my grip and left the kitchen. Leaving me alone with the remnants of a past I'd never been part of, I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old army buddy Marcus Reynolds. His voice was surprised but pleased when he picked up. Man, it's been forever. Everything okay? Not really, I admitted. Got time for a drink? An hour later, I was sitting across from Marcus in a dimly lit bar downtown, nursing a whiskey and pouring out the whole bizarre story. Marcus listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly concerned as I detailed the past several weeks. So let me get this straight, he said when I finally fell silent. Your wife's supposedly dead brother shows up out of nowhere, moves into your guest room and is now dying of cancer. And you're just ... going along with it? Let's put that way. It did sound absurd. What else am I supposed to do? Kick a dying man? Out of my house! Tell my wife she can't spend time with her brother in his final days? Marcus took a thoughtful sip of his beer. No, of course not. But man, she lied to you for your entire marriage. That's not a small thing. I know, I sighed, rotating my glass between my palms. But when I try to talk to her about it, she deflects. Everything is about Michael now, his comfort, his care, his limited time. There's no space for us to work through our issues, and how do you feel about that? I considered the question, angry, hurt, confused, but also guilty for feeling that way. Michael's dying, for God's sake. My problems with Melissa seem trivial in comparison. They're not trivial, Marcus countered firmly. Your marriage is falling apart, that matters. I took a large swallow of whiskey, welcoming the burn. I think it was falling apart before Michael even showed up. We just didn't notice. Or didn't. Want to notice? So what are you going to do about it? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? Continue living in this limbo, watching my wife slip further away as she devoted herself to her brother's care. Try to force conversations she clearly wasn't ready to have. Or ... I think I need some distance, I said slowly, the idea forming. As I spoke, some space to figure out what I want, what's best for all of us. Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. My cousin's a lawyer. Family law. I could give you his number, if you want to know your options. I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I think that would be good. The next day I called in sick to work. Again, and met with Marcus's cousin, David, at his downtown office. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, with a view of the river from the 43rd floor. It made me feel small, insignificant, sitting there in my wrinkled button-down explaining the mess my life had become. David was professional and non-judgmental. Taking notes as I spoke, when I finished, he set down his pen and regarded me thoughtfully. So, you're considering separation, he summarized. Possibly divorce. The word sent a chill through me. I don't know. Maybe. I just know I can't keep living like this, feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. I understand, David said, and somehow I believed that he did. But before we discuss legal options, I have to ask, have you tried? Counseling? Professional mediation? I shook my head. With everything going on with Michael, Melissa doesn't have the bandwidth for that right now. And after, David pressed, after Michael passes, which, forgive my bluntness, sounds imminent would. She'll be open to working on the marriage then? The question gave me pause. I honestly didn't know. Would Melissa, devastated by losing her brother a second time, want to salvage our relationship? Or would she retreat further into herself, making reconciliation impossible? Oh no, I admitted, but I can't put my life on hold waiting to find out. David nodded, making another note. In that case, let's talk about temporary separation. It doesn't commit you to divorce, but it gives you both some space while maintaining legal protections. We spent the next hour discussing logistics, finances, living arrangements, communication protocols. By the time I left David's office, I had a clearer picture of what separation would look like. But my heart felt heavier than ever. On the drive home, I rehearsed what I would say to Melissa. I would be calm, rational, would explain that this wasn't a punishment, but a necessary step for my own mental health. I would assure her that I wasn't abandoning her during this difficult time. I would still be available to help with Michael's care if needed, but I would also be firm. Things couldn't continue as they were. When I arrived home, however, my carefully prepared speech evaporated at the sight that greeted me. An ambulance was parked in our driveway, its lights flashing silently. Paramedics were wheeling a stretcher out our front door, Raquel lying pale and still upon it, with Melissa following closely behind, her face streaked with tears. What happened? I asked, rushing to her side. He collapsed, she said, her voice hollow with shock. He was fine one minute, talking about a fishing trip we took when we were kids, and the next, ... he just collapsed. I think it might be a complication from the cancer. Maybe it's spread to his brain. I put my arm around her shoulders, my own concerns temporarily forgotten. I'll drive you to the hospital. The next several hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, antiseptic smells, and hushed conversations with medical staff. Michael was immediately taken for scans. While Melissa and I sat in the waiting room, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. I wanted to tell her about my meeting with David, about my decision to separate, but how could I add that burden to what she was already carrying? Finally, a doctor approached us, his expression grave. Mrs. Reynolds. I'm Dr. Kaplan. I've been overseeing your brother's care. Melissa stood, gripping my hand so tightly her nails dug into my palm. How is he? Can I see him? Dr. Kaplan gestured. For us to sit back down, taking the chair opposite, your brother's condition has deteriorated significantly. The cancer has metastasized to his brain, causing swelling that led to his collapse. We've placed him in a medically induced coma to reduce the pressure and make him more comfortable. But, he paused, his eyes compassionate. I'm sorry, but we're looking at days now, not weeks. Melissa made a small wounded sound, like an animal caught in a trap. No, that can't be right. Just this morning he was fine. He was laughing, telling stories. Cancer can be unpredictable, especially at this advanced stage, Dr. Kaplan explained gently. Sometimes patients have good days right before a major decline. It's called terminal lucidity. Can I see him? Melissa asked again, her voice barely audible. Of course. He's in the ICU. I'll have a nurse take you up. As we followed the nurse through the labyrinthine corridors of the hospital, Melissa seemed to fold in on herself, becoming smaller with each step. When we reached Michael's room, the sight of him intubated, surrounded by beeping machines. His once robust frame, now frail and sunken, nearly broke me. If it was this hard for me, a virtual stranger. I could only imagine what Melissa was feeling. She approached the bed slowly, as if afraid her mere presence might somehow hurt him further. Gently, she took his hand, careful not to disturb the "Line, I'm here, Mikey," she whispered, using a nickname I'd never heard her use before. "Your big sister's here?" "I'm not going anywhere." I stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of my place in this intimate scene. Eventually, I murmured something about getting coffee and slipped out, giving Melissa the privacy she clearly needed. In the hospital cafeteria, nursing a cup of terrible coffee, I called David. "I can't do it," I told him without preamble. "God." Now, Michael's taken a turn for the worse. He's in the ICU, not expected to last the week. I can't leave Melissa to face that alone. David was quiet for a moment. "I understand," he said finally. "But James, be honest with yourself. Are you staying? Because Melissa needs you, or because it's easier than making a difficult decision?" The question stung, because there was truth in it. Part of me was relieved to have an excuse to delay the separation, to not have to face the potential end of my marriage. But another part, a larger part, genuinely couldn't bear the thought of Melissa going through this loss without support. Both, maybe, I admitted, but whatever my reasons, I know I can't leave. "Not yet, all right," David conceded. "But when this is over, when Michael is gone, and the immediate grief has passed, you'll need to make a decision, for both your sakes." I promised I would and ended the call, sitting alone in the cafeteria for a long time afterward. Watching hospital staff come and go, all of them part of this ecosystem of suffering and healing that seemed so separate from normal life. When I finally returned to Michael's room, Melissa was exactly as I'd left her, holding her brother's hand, speaking to him softly. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "The nurse says he can probably hear me," she said. "That even in a coma, patients often retain some awareness of their surroundings." I nodded, pulling up a chair beside her. "Then we should keep talking to him. Let him know he's not alone." For the next 3 days, Melissa barely left Michael's side. She slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair, ate only when I insisted, and spent hours talking to her unconscious brother, reminiscing about their childhood, updating him on her life. During the years they'd been separated, even reading aloud from books they'd both loved growing up, I came and went, bringing fresh clothes, handling necessary calls to our employers, checking on the house. But I always returned, sitting quietly with Melissa, offering silent support. We didn't discuss our marriage, the lies, the pending separation. All of that seemed irrelevant in the face of Michael's imminent death. On the 4th day, early in the morning, Michael's condition suddenly worsened. His oxygen levels dropped, his blood pressure plummeted, and the room filled with medical staff, working urgently to stabilize him. "He's going into multi-system organ failure," one doctor explained as they ushered us out into the hallway. "It's not uncommon in late-stage cancer patients. We'll do what we can to make him comfortable, but you should prepare yourselves." Melissa sagged against me, and I supported her weight, guiding her to a nearby waiting area. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "We just found each other again. It's not fair." "No," I agreed, holding her close. "It's not fair at all." After what felt like an eternity, a nurse came to inform us that Michael had been stabilized enough for us to return to his room, but that the end was near. "It could be hours, it could be minutes," she said gently. "But if there's anyone else who should be here, now's the time to call them." Melissa shook her head. "There's no one else, just us." Back in Michael's room, the change in him was stark. His skin had taken on a grayish hue, and his breathing was labored despite the ventilator. Melissa resumed her position by his side, taking his hand in hers. "I'm here, Mikey," she said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, you can rest now. You don't have to fight anymore." I stood behind her, my hands on her shoulders, offering what comfort I could. Together, we watched as Michael's breathing became more irregular, as the spaces between breaths grew longer. And then, so quietly it was almost imperceptible, he simply stopped. No dramatic final gasp, no machine alarms, just a transition from life to non-life so subtle, we might have missed it if we hadn't been watching so intently. The doctor came in a few minutes later, checked for vital signs, and officially pronounced him dead at 10:47 a.m. Melissa sat motionless, still holding her brother's hand, as if by maintaining contact, she could somehow keep him tethered to this world. "Melissa," I said softly after the doctor had left. "He's gone." She nodded but didn't move. "I know, I just can't let go yet." So we stayed there, Melissa holding her dead brother's hand, me holding Melissa, until she was ready to let go. It took almost an hour before she finally released him, gently placing his hand back on the bed and standing up. "I need some air," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I followed her out of the hospital and into the parking lot, where she abruptly stopped and turned to face me. "I heard you," she said. "What? On the phone?" "In the cafeteria 3 days ago. I came looking for you, and I heard you talking to someone named David about separation." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Melissa, I know. Let me finish," she interrupted. "You said you couldn't leave because of what was happening with Michael, that you couldn't leave me to face it alone." Her eyes, though reddened from crying, were clear and direct. "Well, now Michael's gone, so there's nothing holding you back. Any more, is there?" The bluntness of her statement left me momentarily speechless. "It's not that simple," I finally managed. "Isn't it?" she challenged. "You've made up your mind, James. You want out. And honestly, after everything that's happened, I don't blame you." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small. "I've lied to you. I've excluded you. I've been so focused on Michael that I've neglected our marriage. Why would you want to stay?" I had no answer for her. It's the reasons that had seemed so clear when I sat in David's office now felt muddled and insufficient. Yes, Melissa had lied. Yes, our marriage had been strained. But standing here in this hospital parking lot, watching my wife try to hold herself together after losing her brother for the second time, all I felt was an overwhelming desire to protect her, to ease her pain in any way I could. "Let's not make any decisions right now," I said gently. "Yeah, you're grieving. We both are. Let's just get through the next few days, and then we can talk about what comes next." Melissa looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but James, I meant what I said before. If you want to leave, I won't try to stop you. You deserve better than what I've given you these past years." Before I could respond, she turned and walked back toward the hospital, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot, more confused than ever about what I truly wanted. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, paperwork, and stilted conversations. Melissa and I moved around each other in our home like wary strangers, both of us too exhausted, too emotionally drained to address the elephant in the room, the future of our marriage. Michael had left explicit instructions. For his funeral cremation, no religious service, just a small gathering of people who had known him. Since that list consisted essentially of only Melissa and me, we opted for a private memorial at a local park where Melissa had taken Michael during his brief stay with us, standing beside the lake, watching Melissa scatter her brother's ashes. Across the water's surface, I was struck by how alone she looked. In that moment, despite everything that had happened, all I wanted was to cross the distance between us and hold her. But something held me back, perhaps for fear that my comfort would be unwelcome. When we returned home, Melissa immediately retreated to the guest room, Michael's room, closing the door behind her. I stood in the hallway, uncertain whether to follow, to offer comfort, or to give her space. In the end, cowardice won out, and I headed to our bedroom alone. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, Melissa had lied to me for our entire relationship, had kept a fundamental part of herself hidden away. On the other hand, I couldn't help but understand her reasons. She had been protecting her brother, honoring his wish for privacy, for anonymity in a world that had chewed him up and spat him out. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and headed downstairs for a glass of water. To my surprise, the kitchen light was already on. Melissa was sitting at the table, a mug of tea cooling in front of her, staring into nothing. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Couldn't sleep either? I shook my head. Filling a glass from the tap, too much on my mind. Same. She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. I keep expecting to hear him moving around upstairs. Isn't that strange? He was only here for a couple of months, but somehow it feels like he's always been part of this house. I took a seat across from her, cradling my water glass. He made an impression. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. He always did. Even as a kid, he had this way of ... taking up space. It's not physically, but, energetically. He was always the center of attention, even when he wasn't trying to be. You never told me that about him, I said quietly. You never told me anything about him. Melissa's smile faded. No, I didn't. She took a deep breath, meeting my eyes. Directly. I've been thinking a lot about that. About all the things I didn't tell you. All the ways I shut you out. And I want you to know I'm sorry, James. Truly sorry. The apology, so simple and yet so heartfelt, caught me off guard. Why did you do it? I asked. The question that had been burning inside me for weeks. Why not just tell me the truth from the beginning? Melissa considered the question, her hands wrapped around her mug as if seeking warmth. When I first met you, Michael was still very much a secret. He'd only recently contacted me, and he was ... fragile, unstable. He made me promise not to tell anyone about him, not even the man I was dating. She paused, seemingly lost in the memory. And then, as time went on, as things between us got more serious, it became harder to find the right moment to say, oh, by the way, my brother isn't actually dead. So you just kept lying? Yes, she admitted, her voice small. I kept lying. And with each lie, the truth became more difficult to tell. I told myself I was protecting Michael, that I was respecting his wishes. But the truth is, I was also protecting myself. I was afraid of how you'd react, afraid you'd see me differently if you knew I'd been dishonest. The longer it went on, the more justified that fear became. I absorbed her words, turning them over in my mind. There was a logic to them, a human frailty I could understand. How many times had I myself avoided a difficult conversation? Let a small deception grow into a larger one, simply because facing the truth seemed too daunting. I understand why you did it, I said finally. But understanding doesn't change the fact that our entire relationship has been built on a foundation of lies. How do we move forward from that? How do I trust you again? Melissa's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, she whispered. Don't know if we can. But I want to try, James. If you're willing, I want to try to rebuild that trust. The sincerity in her voice tugged at something deep within me. Despite everything, I still loved this woman. The question was whether love alone was enough to overcome the damage that had been done. I need time, I said honestly. Time to think, to process everything that's happened. Melissa nodded, understanding in her eyes. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. The next morning, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel downtown. Not the dramatic exit to my lawyer's office I had once contemplated, but a temporary retreat. A space to breathe and think without the constant reminder of Michael's presence or absence in our home. For a week, I lived in limbo. I went to work, returned to my sterile hotel room, ordered room service, and thought about the 5 years of marriage before Michael's arrival, about the gradual drifting apart that had preceded any revelation of lies. I thought about Melissa's grief, so raw and palpable, and about my own complicated feelings toward a man I had barely known but whose death had nevertheless affected me deeply. On the 7th day, I received a text from Melissa. Guest room is cleared out. Donated Michael's things to the VA. House feels empty without both of you. The message, so simple and yet so laden with meaning, was the catalyst I needed. That evening I checked out of the hotel and drove home, not to pack more belongings. Not to initiate divorce proceedings, but to have the conversation we'd been avoiding for too long. Melissa was in the garden when I arrived, kneeling among the tomato plants, her hands deep in the soil. She looked up as my car pulled into the driveway, surprise and wariness mingling on her face. You're back, she said as I approached, shielding her eyes from the setting sun. Just to talk, I clarified, not wanting to give false hope. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about where we go from here. She nodded, pushing herself to her feet and brushing dirt from her jeans. Let me wash up first. In the kitchen, freshly cleaned and with mugs of coffee between us, we faced each other across the familiar table. So many conversations had happened, here mundane discussions about grocery lists and utility bills, heated arguments about work schedules and family visits, quiet moments of connection over shared meals. Now, perhaps the most important conversation of our marriage would take place in this same unremarkable setting. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I began, about us, about Michael, about everything that's happened. Melissa nodded, waiting for me to continue. The thing is, I keep coming back to the same question. Would I have done anything differently in your position? If my brother had returned from the dead, sworn me to secrecy, would I have kept that promise, even from the person I loved most? And honestly, I don't know that I wouldn't have. Hope flickered in Melissa's eyes, but she remained silent, letting me find my way through my thoughts. I'm not saying what you did was right, I continued. The lies, the secrets, they've done damage to our relationship that can't be easily repaired. But I understand why you did it, I think maybe that understanding is the first step toward healing. What are you saying, James? Melissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying I want to try. I want to work on rebuilding our marriage, on establishing a new foundation of honesty and trust. It won't be easy, and I can't promise it will work. But I think we owe it to ourselves through the 5 years we've shared to at least try. Tears welled in Melissa's eyes. Are you sure? Because if you're not, if there's any doubt in your mind, I'd rather you leave now than stay out of obligation or pity. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine, the first time we'd touched with intent since Michael's death. I'm not staying out of obligation or pity. I'm staying because despite everything, I still love you. I think you still love me. I do, she said, her voice breaking. God, James, I've never stopped loving you. Even when I was keeping secrets, even when I was focused on Michael, you were always the center of my world. I squeezed her hand. Then we start there, with love, and we build on it day by day, conversation by conversation, truth by truth. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. There were no passionate embraces, no dramatic declarations of eternal devotion. Just a flawed people, sitting at a kitchen table, making the conscious choice to face their problems together rather than apart. That night, we slept in the same bed for the first time in weeks, not touching but aware of each other's presence. The gulf between us still wide, but no longer unbridgeable. The next morning, I made an appointment with a marriage counselor. Melissa contacted a grief support group. Small steps, but important ones, toward healing both ourselves and our relationship. As the weeks passed, we established new routines. Every evening we would sit together and share one truth, something we had never told each other before. Sometimes, these truths were trivial. Melissa admitted she'd never liked my favorite tie. I confessed to secretly feeding her houseplants when she was away because I always forgot to water them. There are times they cut deeper. She told me about the crushing guilt she'd felt when she first saw Michael again, knowing she had built a happy life while he had struggled. I shared my fear that I'd never be enough for her, that I'd always be competing with ghosts. Slowly, conversation by conversation, we rebuilt our understanding of each other. The Melissa I came to know through these exchanges was more complex, more flawed, but also more real than the woman I had thought I married. I'd like to think she discovered new dimensions to me as well. 6 months after Michael's death, we scattered the rest of his ashes at Lake Champlain, where he and Melissa had spent those childhood summers she'd spoken of. Standing on the shore, watching the ashes drift across the water's surface, I felt a sense of closure, not just for Michael's life, but for the chapter of our marriage that had been defined by secrets and lies. That evening, sitting on the hotel balcony overlooking the lake, Melissa turned to me with a seriousness in her eyes that immediately commanded my attention. There's something I need to tell you, she said. One last secret. My heart sank. After all the progress we'd made, the thought that she might still be hiding something significant was almost too much to bear. What is it? She took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Of all the possible secrets, this was perhaps the last one I had expected. Pregnant? Are you sure? She nodded, a tentative smile forming. 8 weeks, I found out yesterday, but how? I mean, we haven't? We hadn't been intimate since before Michael's arrival, nearly 7 months ago? Understanding dawned in her eyes. Oh no, it's definitely yours. Remember that night after Marcus's birthday party? When we both had too much wine and ... I did remember. A rare moment of connection in what had otherwise been a period of increasing distance. So we are... right? We're having a baby? We are, she confirmed. If you want to, that is. I know we're still finding our way back to each other, and this complicates things... Double quotes. I reached for her hand, a laugh of pure joy escaping me. Complicates in the best possible way. I pulled her close, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. A fresh start for all of us. Life isn't a neat narrative with clear beginnings and endings. It's messy, complicated, full of unexpected twists and painful truths. My wife invited a stranger into our guest room, her brother, a man I never knew. Existed, and in doing so, she shattered the illusion of our perfect marriage. But from those broken pieces, we've built something new. Something stronger because it's rooted in honesty rather than comfortable lies. Every relationship faces its tests, its moments of crisis. For some, the answer is to walk away, to start anew with someone else. For others, like Melissa and me, the answer is to stay, to do the hard work of rebuilding, recommitting, relearning each other day by day. I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if the child growing inside Melissa will have her eyes or mine, Michael's adventurous spirit, or my cautious nature. I don't know if the trust we've painstakingly reconstructed will withstand the next challenge life throws our way, but I do know this. Love, real love, isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you respond when those mistakes come to light. It's about choosing each other again and again, even when it would be easier to walk away. If you've enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue creating content that explores the complexities of human relationships, the difficult choices we face, and the resilience of the human spirit. Leave a comment below, sharing a time when you faced a crossroads in a relationship. Did you stay or did you go? And what made you make that choice? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.